This is good. Huh?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very special edition of Hos Ole Robert at Ole Roberts. Today we have some very special guests with us.
Very special.
Very special.
Extremely special.
Just some safety instructions first. In case of an emergency, the exit is behind here, the exit where you came in, and also the meeting point in case of an emergency is just outside here. My name is Inger Settov, and I'm the communication director of Reitan Retail. And it's my privilege to wish you all welcome to this special day and podcast. So today, as you know, typically Ole Robert has this podcast in his kitchen. And this is special because today he has a little sidekick to the left of him. And that is his brother, Magnus, who's also the CEO of Reitan Capital. And to the right, we have, of course, from all the way over there, Mr. Anthony Scaramucci. He is the managing director and founder of Skybridge Capital. He's also the founder and chair of the world's biggest hedge fund conference, I believe, SALT. You've written 7 books, I think. But of course,
are you going to mention that Trump fired me at some point?
We'll come to that.
It's coming up. It's coming up. Of course, what's made
maybe
him...
you're being too polite, maybe.
And you also have a podcast, which is called The Rest is Politics US. And, of course, mostly famous about his world record in the shortest time in the White House. So, please, wish you all welcome with a big hand to all of you, Ole Robert, Magnus, and Anthony.
Thank you so much. This is a fantastic day. I think this is definitely the highlight of Hos Ole Robert so far. And the biggest kitchen I've been in so far as well. So this is fantastic. I hope everyone listens to the podcast also the rest of the year. But this is definitely special. Since Inger took the whole introduction, Anthony, I think we just go straight to it because you know, for us Norwegians, Donald Trump is an interesting character, I would say. He's different from what we have been used to in rhetorics and in language and in politics and in strategies and everything. And it's not, for most of us, not very likable, I think. And you have a very, very impressive CV. You have a law degree from Harvard. You have been working at Goldman Sachs. You're a founder of a big hedge fund. You're a founder also of a big investor conference. You have a spotless CV in so many ways. So what happened? What happened when Donald Trump called you and you said, yes, of course I want to work with communication for the Trump government?
Well, I think if it's okay, I'll take a minute to go back a little bit because I think it'll be important to provide context. So I knew Mr. Trump, or we'll call him Mr. Trump because prior to him being president, for about 20 years. I had worked at CNBC, which is a television network in New York, and he was on NBC. He was on The Apprentice, which was the reality show related to business. And so we had a relationship. We went to baseball games together. We socialized. We bought some charity tables together. So I had a relationship with him. I wasn't his friend. I think anybody that tells you they're Donald Trump's friend really doesn't understand the relationship. You're not his friend. You're acquaintance of his. And so I was a lifelong Republican. I was a lifelong Republican fundraiser, and I was working for Jeb Bush at that time. And so when Jeb got knocked out of the race by Donald Trump, he called me and asked me to go work for him. And I was reluctant to do it. You know, my wife really doesn't like him. My wife hates it. My wife hates Donald Trump almost as much as Melania hates him. And I'm talking like, and that's some severe, Eastern European hatred. And you know what I'm talking about. But in any event, she told me not to do it. I didn't listen to her. I would have did it. One of the biggest mistakes of my life. But I think it's important to understand I was a lifelong Republican. He won the nomination. None of us, including himself, didn't think he was going to win. But this is an important part of the story. I went with him to a fundraiser in New Mexico. And prior to the fundraiser, we went to this very big rally. And I was moved by this, and I'm going to explain why. I grew up in a blue-collar neighborhood. My father didn't go to college. My mother was actually a makeup artist, so we didn't see her on Saturdays because she was making up the bridal parties out on Long Island. But my dad worked with his hands. He was an hourly worker. And when I was in New Mexico with Mr. Trump, I got to meet people that were very much so like my father, but they had gone from where my dad was in the 1960s, what I would call economically aspirational. These very same people were now economically desperational. And I was talking with them, and one gentleman said to me, "Oh, Anthony, you think you're in New Mexico?" New Mexico, okay, that would be Mexico. That's where my factory moved. And I remember leaving there and getting back on Mr. Trump's plane and flying. We were flying to California. I got up on the internet, I looked up my dad's union, and I told Mr. Trump, I said, listen, you know, my dad's wages, his 1976 wages in 2016 were down about 26% in terms of the purchasing power. Sure, the inflation was up, but his ability to have us live in the middle class or be in a small house, that was over for a family like mine. And so when you ask me about why I was drawn to him, because of the way I grew up, I thought at that time, I got it wrong, of course, but I thought at that time, okay, the establishment politicians in this country are missing. They've created this vacuum of advocacy for the people that I grew up with, and like or dislike him, he saw that. Now, unfortunately, he didn't do anything with it. If anything, he's actually harmed those people. He's made the situation worse. But that's what drew me to him. And so, I was famously or infamously in the White House for 11 days, but I worked with him for 9 months on the campaign. I did 71 campaign stops with him throughout the United States. When he won the election, which none of us thought he was going to win, he named me to the executive transition team. So I worked alongside of Jim Mattis and General Kelly to build that government. And by the way, I submit to you, and I don't say it because I was involved with it, but that government was a way better government and a way better cabinet structure than the one that he has now. We had a lot of very thoughtful people there that were blocking President Trump's real instincts. You know, these imbecilic tariffs and things like that would have been imposed in 2018 if we didn't have those people around to prevent that from happening.
We're going to come back to the 11 days, but I think...
But it was a stupid decision. I do acknowledge that.
And we're going to... I think we're going to...
I don't run from my mistakes. I try to own them.
We're going to plan to wrap it up with the 11 days, because if we work towards the 11 days with a little bit of what should we call it, ethical context, maybe, because Magnus, I want to ask you, what's your relationship to golf?
Well, I love playing golf myself, and I have a professional golfer as a son.
That was
playing quite well, so yeah. So,
and he's doing very, very, very well at the moment. And what would you say is the most important ethical principle of golf?
Integrity. You know, you don't have a referee walking around with you. You have to make sure that you follow the rules at all times, and it's up to you. It's your own integrity. And when Susanne Petterson, before I even knew who Donald Trump was, she told me she had played golf with a guy called Donald Trump, a businessman in the U.S., and he was cheating all the time. Everything he did was he cheated on the golf course every time. You know, they call his foot wedge, because he can kick the ball from the rough into the fairway. And yeah.
And I actually sent you an Instagram reel just a couple of days ago where you saw the caddy. I think it was in Scotland where Christopher played last weekend, where he have his caddy throwing balls for him. When he goes into the water, the ball is suddenly, magically, it's back in the rough.
I think it's on the green. I don't think it's on the...
This is sort of to build up this character that we're going to talk about your 11 days as a professional collaborator with at the end. But is this something that could tell us something about Donald Trump and his character, maybe?
Well, I think that he's an interesting guy in the following respect. it's almost like a kaleidoscope. You can see that aperture, you look at him that way, and then you turn it a little bit, you see something different. Again, people can like this or dislike this. He has phenomenal political instincts, phenomenal. If you're telling me that Bill Clinton didn't use the foot wedge when he played golf, I'm telling you he did, okay? You may have liked Bill Clinton better, but most of these politicians in the United States have elements of dishonesty to their personality. He could be at the extreme. You know, Mark Esper is a very close friend of mine. He was our Secretary of Defense under Donald Trump. The president got very sore at him. There were certain things that he just wasn't willing to do, result of which he was fired by President Trump and ridiculed. And then President Trump took his security away from him, you know, the Secret Service, which I think is reprehensible. So he's at the high end of the extreme of dishonesty. I'm not saying that he isn't. But most of these people, unfortunately, are dishonest. I'm just telling you the facts. I've met most of them. I've interacted with, worked with some of them. So it should have been, I think the point you're making, this guy's very dishonest. Why did you go work for him? I think this is the big dilemma for the American people as well. If you give the American people two choices, they only have two choices. And then the question is, who are they going to choose in an election? And sometimes they're choosing the lesser of the two evils as opposed to somebody that they really like or somebody that they're willing to support. And I just want to remind everybody here that the best thing that Donald Trump has going for him are the Democrats. By far the best thing, because Hillary Clinton ran a disastrous campaign, disaster. There are swing states in the United States. I'm sure most of you are familiar with our electoral politics. Secretary Clinton did not go to Wisconsin after her convention. The Trump campaign, we were in Wisconsin 11 times. She went to Pennsylvania once. It was the evening before the vote started. Mr. Trump was in Pennsylvania 15 times after the early August convention. So the point I'm making is you got two choices. They're two, frankly, most of the time terrible choices, and they're two, frankly, most of the time people that are quite unethical. And so you're holding your nose to make the choice. One last point before I ask another question. I want you to think about this. The evening of the election in the United States, the evening of the election, on the 4th of November, the most searchable Google term in the United States was, did Joe Biden drop out? So I just want you to think about the general American public, how apathetic they are to the political system, how apathetic they are to the process. The evening before they're scheduled to vote, they're looking at their choices and saying, wait, where's Biden? And they're typing into the phone, did Joe Biden drop out? And so it's not as informed a group as here in Norway or people like myself on Wall Street. And that's the complexity or sometimes the simplicity of America.
You know, in our business, we tend to think that high business morals or high moral standards is good for business in the long run. But seeing, you know, his success in politics, is it fair to say that, you know, bullying and ignoring moral standards is and bending the truth is probably the best way to succeed also in business?
Well, you know, we were having this conversation backstage, so I obviously don't believe that. And I think the most significant thing I can say about my ability to come back from that disastrous firing is, and I tell my children this, I have 5 of them, if you live with a level of integrity in your life, you'll always have opportunity. And so I didn't do anything wrong. I certainly didn't lie for him. And when I got fired, many of my friends on Wall Street or even political friends called me and said, okay, how can I help you out? What can I do for you? Some people even, frankly, put money in my fund as a gesture of support. And so I think you're right. If you have integrity, you're always going to have opportunity. But let's not be dishonest with history, because we like to see history as deterministic. We like to see the good guys beat the bad guys. But we know throughout history sometimes that happens and sometimes it doesn't. And so he's clearly a bad guy. I have broken from him. I broke from him 2.5, 3, maybe 2 years after I got fired. I thought it was important for me not to break from him right when I got fired. We were fighting in the White House. He fired me. I didn't want to look like a baby, so I didn't break from him then. But in August of 2019, I said he should not be the president, and I started to articulate why. and he shouldn't be the president. He doesn't have the ethical idea. He doesn't even like himself, much less like the American people. So he's just the wrong person in the job. But I'm saying something a little bit more ethereal. We're going to get the wrong people sometimes in the jobs. We don't want those people in those jobs, but we're going to get them. And one of the things about America, which I adored, is that we had a system in place which was very decentralized to protect us from bad people. But over the last 50 years, that system is frayed. And so now the Congress is really, particularly the Senate, is really in the pocket of the president. And so they're not doing their job checking him or checking the elements of his malevolence.
Let's come back to the system and see if it's repairable in any way, because it's definitely, as we talked about backstage as well, the power of a bad president is definitely visible at the moment. The amount of power left with the president when you have the wrong president could be disastrous. But let's talk. We have a very good friend of the house called Thomas Seltzer. He makes very, very beautiful TV about America called UXA. He talked about inequality overall. And maybe the last election also, for many people, was a protest election as a result of humongous inequality in the United States at the moment. So, and Thomas Seltzer, he says that, you know, the white fences in the suburbs of America, all the romantic suburbs were painted the last time late 70s, beginning of the 80s, and they haven't been painted yet still since. Is there any truth to that? Is that the part of the problem as well?
Well, I do think that there's truth to that. I think that we had industrial leadership in the United States at the turn of the century. You know, this has happened before in the United States. So in the 1890s, we had a period in the United States known as the robber barons. These were the railroad and the oil magnates, the shipping magnates. They were taking too much power, and they were taking too much economic rent from the rest of the society. Teddy Roosevelt actually, when he became president, he broke those trusts. He broke the monopolies. He helped to create the labor unions, and he helped to create higher living standards for the poor and for the middle class. Another thing that Teddy Roosevelt did, because he was actually the police commissioner in New York, he traveled into the tenements in New York. He said, okay, this is ridiculous. We can't have no building codes in New York. And so he forced all the developers to strengthen the foundations, put more steel in the buildings. We literally, at the turn of the century, the 1800s into the 1900s, we had tenements collapsing in the Lower East Side of Manhattan because the rich were taking advantage of the poor and not even creating the right building standards. So he fixed all of that, or tried to fix most of it, and then went to the industrialists like Edison, Henry Ford, Alfred P. Sloan, and said, listen, you got to take care of these workers. And Henry Ford said, okay, I'm going to pay the workers enough money so that they can afford the car that they're making in my factory. Moreover, I'm going to make sure that they have enough money that they can have a single-family house and they can have access to a good school system for their children. So this way, each family had some level of hope in the society. And, you know, he famously said, I don't want them descending upon my Dearborn, Michigan mansion with tiki torches and pitchforks rebelling against me while I'm enjoying myself. I want them to have secure economic lives and some level of hope in their lives. That got expanded upon at the end of the Second World War. The United States brought in the Great Society programs, more food for the poor, more health care security for the elderly. And then we did something called the GI Bill. I don't know if you guys would know what that is, but if you were in the American military, and most families had at least one family member in the American military, you got free college education if you came back to the United States. So you had poor Italian families where the dad was a Mason, but now the son went to war and he's becoming an accountant or a lawyer, or pick a family. And so this had a dramatic effect on painting those white picket fences. And so the neighborhood I grew up in, my dad was a crane operator. We had a small house, but a nice enough house. We had a sheetrock installer next to us. We had a landscaper. It was a very vibrant blue-collar neighborhood. But every parent in that neighborhood said, you know what? My kids, one or two of them, maybe all of them, are going to grow up and live the American dream. They're going to move from the neighborhood they're in now into something bigger or something larger. And I certainly did that. But where my heart breaks now for the country is the leadership in the country over the last 30 years has grown indifferent to those people. They used to care for those people. In fact, you know, the Democrats, the people that are now voting for Donald Trump, their grandparents voted for Lyndon Johnson or Jack Kennedy, or their great-grandparents voted for Franklin Roosevelt, but they're now voting for Donald Trump because it's an expression of anger more than it's an expression of hope. You know, Trump is like an orange wrecking ball. Those people are saying to themselves, you know what? You're not taking care of me. You're not taking care of my family. Okay, I would like to hire somebody to hurt you. You see, this is the populist movement in the United States, and this is why he's so powerful. He can commit all types of sins. It's not just kicking the golf ball around. I mean, you could just list all of the major things that he's done, but those people are with him. Trump famously said, hey, I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue, and they'll stay with me. And the reason is they're angry. The reason is they have this sense of desperation about them, and so a result of which they are using him to express that anger.
If we talk about truth, just for a minute, I think it was Lenin that established Pravda as a result of the revolution, Russian Revolution, and now we have truth social. Pravda means truth in Russian. I think it was Hitler that started to talk about Lügenpresse, lying press, or fake news as they call it now.
Yeah.
Is there and it gives me the chills actually. If you see the red or blue line from Lenin through Hitler to what's happening right now, is that overrated or?
Well, not to me. So I have a podcast. It comes out of the United Kingdom. My podcast co-host, Caddy Kay, is a British journalist. And Dominic Sambrook, who does The Rest is History, is part of our podcast family. When I call Trump a fascist, they get very mad at me. They say that that's the wrong delineation. You can't call him a fascist. That's reserved for people like Hitler and Mussolini. But when you go down the list, as Robert is pointing out, when you go down the list, the us versus them, the demolition of the free press, to your point, and constructing the propaganda of something that isn't true, but is explaining it like it is true. The scapegoating that's happening now in the society, maybe it was Jews in Germany, but it's sort of African Americans and Latino Americans in our society. And if you go down the list, there's a great book by Lawrence Rees called The Nazi Mind. It was written a few months back, and I interviewed him on my other podcast. And if you just read his table of contents, there's 12 chapters in the book. Trump is 12 for 12 in terms of what he's doing and what he's pushing on the society. So now you have a choice. You can either speak out against that, which is the truth, or you can acquiesce to it. And the biggest problem that we're having in our country right now that I see is the fear. Because one of the things that these people do is they create lots of intimidation to silence you and to put you in a fear-based position where people are like, well, you know, I'm going to let this slide because I've got to protect my family, and they start to make this equivocation. I can't do that because I once worked for him and I helped him. So I now have a moral responsibility to speak out against him and explain what he did. Moreover, I'm named after my uncle Anthony was on Normandy Beach on the 6th of June, 1944. My uncle Salvatore fought in the Battle of the Bulge. These guys were brave enough to take a stand against fascism in the 1940s in harm's way. My uncle was actually a Purple Heart recipient. He was wounded. He got off the beach safely, but he was wounded a couple days later in a battle in a small town in France on the way to Paris. And by the way, think of these personalities. He was in a field hospital for 3 months, healed himself up, refused to be discharged, and fought in the Battle of the Bulge. So if those people who are in my family could do that, I can certainly use my mind and my energy and my words to speak up against what I think is fascist behavior. But many, people in the UK would say, oh, no, you can't call him a fascist. It's too extreme of a term. But I submit to you that it is fascist behavior, and I think it's incredibly dangerous. And good people's silence enables this type of behavior. There's 50% of my country. There's even people that have voted for Donald Trump that think this is terrible what he's doing. They have to speak up. And so it's important for people like me to show them the way to do that. You have to speak up, and you have to bring people out. Particularly what he's doing in Washington, guys. I don't know if you're watching this. He's going to bring the National Guard into Washington now, and he's going to militarize the city. I can't tell you how dangerous that is from a perspective. Because once he militarizes the city, how are we going to get him to leave the city? Okay, see what he's doing? I know what he's doing because I know the son of a bitch.
But Anthony, if you look
Sorry
at...
about that. I was
some
trying to stay out of character, not throw a few curse words around. Sorry.
Because this is interesting, because sometimes you see TV pictures from North Korea with excited crowd. They clap like this. You've seen it many times. It's like puppies. They clap like this. And then you now see Republicans clapping more or less in the same way, because this must be... this is intelligent people. They have been working in politics their whole lives. They've built their career on that. They are sound and good Americans and good Republicans, and they act like North Koreans, clapping their hands off for a guy that's lying constantly. So what's happening with the Republican Party?
I want you to think about Nazi Germany for a second. We all read about this and the horror of Nazi Germany, and we like to think about ourselves as moral people with good integrity. We say to ourselves, oh, if I was in Nazi Germany, I would protect Anne Frank. I would find sanctuary for her, or I would figure out a way to help the Jews get out of the country. But then when you are living it, you realize what happens. People start to make the equivocation in their minds, and they start to rationalize their indifference to the horror of it. So somebody like Lindsey Graham can't stand Donald Trump. Tom Bremer, I know Tom personally. If you sat in a room with him, he can't stand Donald Trump. John Thune can't stand Donald Trump. Mitch McConnell, who's now 83 or 84, is now writing about how much he can't stand Donald Trump. And yet they all fall in line for Donald Trump. Why are they doing that? And this has to do with selfishness. This has to do with, rather than serving the public as a good public servant, they're in the public, but they're in self-service. So we've transitioned some of these politicians from public servants into public self-servants. And that's exactly what they're doing. Their attitudes are, you know what? I'm going to outlast Donald Trump. When the fever breaks, I'll switch gears again. How many people in this room have seen The Wizard of Oz? You remember The Wizard of Oz? Okay, there's a great scene in The Wizard of Oz where the water accidentally hits the witch, and she starts melting. Do you remember what the guards all did? They looked at Robert. Oh, I'm so sorry, Dorothy. I'm so sorry that I was caught up in her fever dream. I was so caught up in her personality cult. That's what these Republicans will do when he leaves. And it's insulting to the American people, but they're getting away with it because of the system. We haven't addressed gerrymandering yet, but just briefly, I want you to think about this. The politicians in the United States are now picking the voters. I thought the voters were supposed to pick the politicians, but not in the United States. They look at the district. They say, okay, that person's with me. Let's make sure their house is in my district. Oh, that person's not with me. These districts, when I was a kid, they looked like geometric shapes that you could recognize from your middle school geometry. They now look like jigsaw puzzles. And so this empowers the politician, because think about this, the American Congress to the American people has a 14% approval rating. That's like slightly above the North Korean dictator that Robert just mentioned. And yet they have a 95% incumbent reelection rate. So it's like if we opened up a restaurant and I'm a really bad chef and you guys are giving me bad Yelp ratings, but nobody's firing me. They stay in the Congress. They passed a spending bill 2 weeks ago. 38% of the Americans were for the bill. They passed it anyway. Why? They don't care. The lobbyists paid them to do it. They're currying favor for themselves. They're enriching themselves and their families. They took 17 million people. Let me repeat that. They took 17 million people off the healthcare system to pass that bill. They gave a tax cut to the wealthy, and they hurt the poor. And so let me give you the average numbers. If you're making $1 million a year in the United States, you got a $7,000 benefit. If you're making $50,000 or less, you got a $700 cut to your benefits package. That's what they did in the United States, and they did it very bald-faced. 62% of the people said, please don't do it, but these guys don't care anymore. They're in a bad loop that's hurting the country. And so we have to break that loop. We need more entrepreneurial politicians to explain to the American people what they're actually doing. But then we need institutional change, because one thing I can predict, guys, is that you're going to have good and bad people in politics. Just like you're going to have good and bad people in business or good and bad neighbors, you're not going to be able to, we're going to wait out Trump. He's a really bad guy. The next person, he or she, is going to be a really good person. It's not enough. You have to reform the system to protect the people from the good and the bad. And we're not doing that anymore, and that's why the country's starting to hurt, and that's why there's a much bigger separation between the wealthy and the poor in the country. And listen, I have seen both sides of this. I didn't tell Robert or Magnus this, but like one of my core memories as a kid, I was 8 years old. It was March of 1972. And I used to walk to school. Our house was close to the school. When I opened the side door to the house to come home, my grandmother and my mother were ecstatic. They were very, very happy. I remember this like it was yesterday. And I didn't really understand why. But it turned out that a washer and dryer was delivered into the unfinished basement of our house. And so this was the first time in my grandmother's life, she was probably 65 at the time, where she didn't have to go to the local laundromat and carry the laundry to the local laundromat to do the laundry. They finally had saved up enough money to have it in the house. So I have seen the whole thing. I have seen the story of America from blue-collar immigrants coming to America, working with their hands, going to Tufts and Harvard Law School, the salons of the wealthy, the White House. I've seen the whole spectrum. So I can identify with both sides, and I can tell you that we're in very sore need of institutional reform.
Do you think the American dream is still alive? Do you think that if you were born 30 years later or even today, that you would have succeeded the way you have?
Well, the short answer is no. It would have been impossible to have succeeded the way I have, because the school system in the area is not as good as it once was. The area is a little bit more frayed. The picket fences are unpainted, to use Robert's metaphor. So it would have been way harder, Magnus. Is it dead? I would say no, it's not dead, because it's an interesting country. The country is very adaptive. You will find about this country is that it adapts itself very quickly. The dynamism of the American people is still there. It's immigrants, it's risk takers from Norway and Italy and Ireland. Maybe they left these countries for different reasons. My family left because they couldn't find work. And they got to the United States and they were able to figure things out. So if you change the system or you offer some reform to the system, I think it could come back. But no, I think if I was born 30 years later, I don't think I would be here with you guys. It would have just been a different life. It's way harder today than it should be.
So how can you help on the reform that you need and to come back to a democratic system and a constitutional system that actually works, and come back to fighting inequality in a better way? Because you could definitely, I think you've been here for 24 hours now. You could see the difference between Norway and the United States of America, literally, as you walk down the down the street here. Is there a way back to
Well, I think
America?
Well, first of all, your country's beautiful, and it's. I mean, I said the thing. I was with the Prime Minister last night. The fact that I went on. You have a television stage out here. I crossed the pier to go onto the television. That would never happen in the United States. You would have to pass through a metal detector to get on a television stage, and for somebody like me who doesn't know the Prime Minister, to be that close to the Prime Minister or the President in the United, it would never happen in the United States. You'd have tons of security. You'd have tons of, and so. But this is a sign that you're doing something right in your culture and in your society. Because if there's not a lot of want in a society, then people don't take the risks of doing things that are wrong. Just think about that. No want, you have less of a proclivity or a temptation to do something wrong. But if you're hurting, you're like, okay, I'm going to go steal from that drugstore, or I'm going to go rob that person's car. And so we've got to get back to something that's more basic for the American people. And so it's not communistic or being socialistic to want people to have an equal opportunity. I don't believe in equal outcomes. You guys have built a phenomenal business, and you deserve your economic success, and you deserve the economic rent from the hard work. You should not have equal outcomes in a society, but you do need to create a platform of equal opportunity, and we're not doing that in America anymore. You need an education system that's fair to the poor. If you grow up in a rich neighborhood in the United States, you get a very good public school education. If you grow up in a inner city in the United States, forget it. They're passing you through the grades without teaching you the basics. And so yeah, no, you have a lot of things going right. It's a unique country, though, a population of 5 million, certain part of the world. You've got great natural resources that you're drawing upon, and you have a culture where you understand that there's a need for some level of collectivism to make everybody safe and to make everybody happy. That's never going to be the United States. The United States is risk-taking immigrants that arrive penniless, that are, they're gambling. They're pushing themselves. They're taking risks. They're throwing the ball. And so you can't expect that from the United States. But there are things that we could do that could create the necessary reform. One of the first things would be to end the gerrymandering. Because if you ended the gerrymandering, you would force the politicians back into the middle. Remember, these campaigns are marketing competitions, and they're just seeking the measure, and they're seeking the policy that's going to please the most amount of people in their district. And so if you mix the districts with Republicans and Democrats, guess what happens? They have to start to get into the middle, and they have to start being more moderate. Can I talk about Citizens United? Is that okay?
Definitely.
Okay, so there's an obscure Supreme Court decision that you may not be familiar with here. But in January of 2010, there was a Supreme Court decision called Citizens United. And Justice Scalia at the time wrote the case, and he basically said if you're super wealthy in the United States, it is your First Amendment right. It's your right to your freedom of expression to use your money in any way you want in politics. And so let's say I'm worth $10 billion and I believe in a candidate. I could take $1 billion and put it towards that candidate's potential success. And if you think about it, this is what Elon Musk did in November of last year. He spent over $390 million helping Donald Trump in some of those swing states. Prior to Citizens United, we had certain restrictions in the society as it related to our campaign donations and what we could spend on. And I submit to everybody in this room, this has created a separate but equal democratic system in the country. If you look at our legislative agenda from January of 2010, it is skewed to the wealthy, corporate welfare, big business, big pharma, big food. The big food guys, they go to the politicians and say, listen, I want you to let me put the fertilizer in the food. Excuse me? Yeah, we're going to put the fertilizer in the kids' cereal because it's going to make the product last longer on the shelf. Would you guys allow that in Norway? Would the EU allow that? So we have food in the country that is literally like eating poison, but the politicians said, no problem, let's do that because we're getting the money from the big food companies. Does everybody understand that? We're chlorinating the chicken in the United States. You guys chlorinate your chicken? I don't think you guys do that.
No.
And so, but we allow that. This all came from this Supreme Court case called Citizens United. So there are things you could do. You could end Citizens United. You could end the gerrymandering. You could create what I'm calling a platform of equal opportunity, where you're making sure the areas of the country that are indigent have certain services. We're doing the very opposite of that right now, though. We've told people we're going to take your Medicaid away. 17 million people are now coming off of Medicaid, and then the rural hospitals. You know, there's a rule in the United States: if you walk into a hospital, it's the ethical obligation of the hospital and the attending official to take care of you. It could be a broken leg, even a sore throat. If you come into the emergency room, they have an obligation. So the rural hospitals went to the Trump administration and said, you're going to knock us out of business. You're taking 17 million people off of Medicaid, which is an easier, more economically efficient way to distribute the health care, and you're going to force them into the emergency rooms when they're sick, which is the most expensive way to treat somebody. So you know what the Trump administration did? They said, okay, no problem. We're going to give each of these rural hospitals some money to protect them. It was cheaper for them to do that because we want to give the tax breaks to our friends who are the very wealthy. Now, I can tell you that does not work in a society, okay? I don't think there's one person here in Norway that wants to live in a barbed-wired McMansion with a security perimeter while your fellow neighbors are suffering. I don't think there's one person I could find in Norway that said, yeah, that works for me. But there is an indifference now from some of these very wealthy people. And again, to provide historical context, this happened in the United States in the 1890s, and you needed some tough politicians to come in to break that up and to make it more fair. So it's not something that hasn't happened before, but it's going to require a certain type of leadership to break this.
You know, Magnus is.
I was hoping that this would be vodka after saying all that, but I think it's just still
that's
water.
That's for the dinner after, Anthony. We're going to have a vodka for dinner.
We'll be doing vodka shots after
Russian
this conversation.
vodka for dinner. I was going to tell you that Magnus is my little brother, you know, 3 years younger. And he is...
Is he better than you at golf?
And this is the point.
Yeah, okay.
This is the point. He's better than me at everything. He was he was better in school. You don't know.
Oh, Martha says it's true. I believe
her. No, he was better than me at school. He was better in music. He was better in sports. He was more or less better than me in everything. And and I take the full credit for everything. And that's because I was a great idol. And a fantastic benchmark. You know, I was 3.5 years older. I was always...
Magnus, I'm going to introduce you to my older brother. Okay? They can hang out together.
Yeah, so super idol, of course, for Magnus. And we're always... It was just to move us forward, because the next...
You were going to say I'm joking, but they all know that you weren't joking.
No.
You all know.
I'm not joking.
I know.
We like to set a good example. That's what we like to do. We like to set a good example as big brothers, as a CEO of a company or a manager of a cycling team or whatever. Cycling champion is over there. We like to set a good example, and Donald Trump isn't setting a good example for us how to interact, is he? Because he's the master of insult. I don't know any cultural person in America right now that he actually likes. Every time a musician or an actor or someone criticizes him for something, he calls them people without talent, overrated Bruce Springsteen, or... so he's sort of...
he's called me a major loser. I don't know.
Yeah. That was probably true, though.
Oh, yeah.
But is
you want your ex-girlfriends talking about you, though. Don't forget that, okay?
80 million people thinks it's okay to have a president that is constantly insulting and dividing people into groups, calling names, so on and so forth. You know what where I'm going. Is this now a part of the American culture to be insulting?
Well, I think that it's, well, let me put it this way. If we were kids and we were in school, we said, well, character is destiny, and if you have good character, good things will happen to you. Trump is the reverse of that. So good things have happened to him. You know, he's risen to the American presidency, breaking all the rules and being immoral and being very divisive. And so that I think is very bad for our culture, because it's teaching young people, oh, well, the president does this and the president does that, so therefore that provides space for me to do it. So that's very, very bad. But I think it's a little unfair to say that the 80 million people accept it, because I talk to the 80 million people. I'm in the street spending time with them, and I think the messaging is a little different. I hate that part of him, but I also hate the establishment. I hate that part of him, but I don't have a job, and the people are not helping me get a job, and so he's smashing into the people that I feel are not helping me. I think it's important to differentiate what's going on. Moreover, again, what I said earlier is true. The best thing Trump has going for him are the Democrats, because if they had he has very low level approval ratings. He's at a 38% approval rating right now. He typically polls below 50%. He got to 50% during the election and won the popular vote, primarily because they didn't field a great candidate. Now, I like Vice President Harris. I worked with her on her debate prep. I was with her the night of the debate. I worked with her and Gavin Newsom after the debate. But unfortunately, she just wasn't the right candidate, and they only gave her 107 days to beat. You're not going to like this, but let me just tell you who he is. He's the most famous person in the world. He's definitely the most famous politician. So you put a woman who was the vice president that had a 71% name recognition in the country against a person that had a 100% name recognition. And so you made it impossible for her. But if Newsom had ran against her, or somebody else had ran, and they went through a formal Democratic primary process and they built a war chest. Remember, Harris came into the race late July, and she had to use Joe Biden's team. Her field operation wasn't in California, her home state, but it was in the state of Delaware, where Joe Biden was from. It was, if you said, okay, how am I going to create an impossible situation for somebody? I could give you all those ingredients, and that was her campaign. So I submit to you that we would have extinguished Donald Trump from the political landscape if the Democrats had consolidated. But here's what the Democrats do, which I tell you is really bad for them. They get very righteous, and they want to cancel people. So Robert mentioned 80 million people. I talked to certain Democrats. They want to cancel those 80 million people. I don't want to do that. I want to bring those 80 million people back into the mainstream and back into the family of America. We can't cancel 80 million people any more than you could cancel the Nazi Party at the end of the Second World War. You know what Hitler's approval rating was in April of 1945? He had a 42% approval rating. The entire country was destroyed. Okay, 60 million people dead as a result of his antics in the Second World War. He still had a 42% approval rating. Do you know what the United States had to do at the end of the Second World War? We hired the SS. Why did we hire the SS? We had to pay them to police keep the area. You know, should we have hired the SS? People would look at that and say morally that was a bereft thing to do. But from a practical point of view, Eisenhower knew if he didn't do that, he wasn't going to stabilize the area. These things can't be overly morally righteous. They have to be elements of practicality to them. The Democrats are like, hey, I was helping Harris. The hard left told her, I don't want Anthony on the campaign plan. And Harris said, well, why don't you want him on the campaign plan? He's trying to help us. He once worked for Donald Trump. And so he's canceled to us. We don't want him on the plane. Okay, that's fine. But if you do that, you're not going to create the coalition necessary to beat somebody that has the force, the political force of Donald Trump.
We are going back to where we started with the famous 11 days in the White House. take us through it minute by minute. I guess it must have been a circus.
We've got 11 minutes left.
Yeah, it's 1 minute for each day. You couldn't have been that surprised because you knew him very well already.
Here's what I'll say, and if you remember only one thing that I've said today, this is the thing I would like you to remember. I made that decision based on my pride and my ego. So, and I will tell you that when you make decisions based on your pride and your ego, you usually make a disastrous decision. You got to get your ego and your pride out of things. You know, I had grown up in a blue-collar family, lots of pride there. I went to Tufts, Harvard, all those places, and now I have a chance to work for the American president. And my wife said, well, yeah, but he's batshit crazy, and you shouldn't go work for him. He's going to really hurt you. But I didn't listen to her because I had my pride going and I had my ego. And so if you only remember one thing I say today, I say this in a very heartfelt way because, you know, your podcast, a lot of young listeners listen to it. Take a moment, take your pride and ego out of your decision-making, whether it's investing, your personal relationships. You know, people don't remember this, but on the 31st of July, 2017, my wife had filed for divorce on me. Not that it wasn't deserved. She's half Norwegian and she's half Italian, so she can beat the shit out of me in hot and cold weather. Okay, but I do love her, and she filed for divorce on me. I missed the birth of my son. Okay, people don't remember this, but my son James is now 8 years old. He was born on the 21st of July. It was a Monday, and I was with Donald Trump at a Boy Scouts convention in northeastern West Virginia. Very obscure place. My wife and I were fighting. She was due on August 8th. She was delivering the baby that evening. I couldn't get out of West Virginia. There was a 60-mile no-fly zone around Air Force One, and I missed the birth of my son. So when I got fired, my wife had filed for divorce. I had missed the birth of my son. I got ripped up by all the late-night comedians. I was on the pages of all the newspapers. It was a very, very bad period of time for me. And it wasn't a health-related thing, but it was a very bad period of time. And so I bring this up as opposed to the TikTok of the 11 days to let you know that you can survive it. You know, I dusted myself off. You don't have a millstone of regret around your neck and kicking yourself for your mistakes. I went back and repaired my marriage. I'm not going to miss another one of my son's birthdays, I can promise you that. And I went back and built my business. And when the time was right to denounce what he was doing, I went on a television stage or I went to a podcast or went into the public domain to explain the danger of what he was doing. And weirdly, those 11 days almost created a platform for me. I wouldn't have had the notoriety had I not gone to work for him to explain the danger of him. And so at least I took whatever disaster that was and turned it into some form of purpose. But now that I said all that, I'm going to tell you a few stories from the 11 days.
Yes!
You want to hear a few
gossip
stories?
time, it's gossip time.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you 3 stories very quickly, which are, I mean, some of them are really embarrassing, but some of them are fun. So story number 1 is the press conference. So I've now been announced as a communications director. Trump wants me to do the press conference that day. I said, okay, no problem. Sean Spicer immediately quit when Trump hired me. I thought, okay, well, that was, I was calling him Liar Spice because every Spice Girl has a nickname. His was, I mean, this guy was the liar of liars. But anyway, so he left, and Priebus and I were fighting, and Bannon, who I think is one of the more malevolent people. I think he spoke here one year or something like that, but he's a super bad guy. So the goal was to try to get those guys out of the White House as well. And I'm in the Oval Office. It's Friday morning, 10 a.m., and we're sitting there with Trump, and Trump brings the staff secretary in, and he tells the staff secretary that I'm going to report directly to him outside of the connectivity to the chief of staff. So that was a very, very bad moment for the chief of staff. And if you look up a picture of me and Reince Priebus, we're literally staring at each other like it was a Western showdown, like a shootout at the OK Corral. Okay, that's story number one. Story number two, I'm on Air Force One with Trump. We're flying to Youngstown, Ohio. And I walk into the president's office, and I'm sitting there with him. He's a germaphobe, if you didn't know this about him. And I have a little bit of a hoarseness going on. And he's looking at me, and he's saying, "Are you okay?" I said, "Yeah, I'm totally fine. I'm sensing a little hoarseness in your voice." Right? He's pressing buttons and so forth. And so the attending White House physician comes into the room. He says, "Something's wrong with Anthony. Go fix him." And I'm like, there's absolutely nothing wrong with me. So now I'm walking down the corridor of Air Force One, and I didn't even know this, but maybe you guys know. There's a huge hospital bay on Air Force One. Lyndon Johnson, after John Kennedy was assassinated, he put a hospital bay. He made a requisition that all the planes would have a hospital. There's a refrigeration unit for the president's blood type, and there's an attending physician, a surgeon, and 2 nurses in the hospital bay at all times. So I walk in there, and the attending physician says, "Open your mouth." I open my mouth. He then says, "Pull down your pants." I said, "Pull down my pants? I'm here for a sore throat. I don't want a proctology." And he looks at me, no, pull down your pants. And so, guys, I just want to let you know, I had my ass hanging out in the hospital as we were flying, and he put 2 shots into my ass. One was penicillin, because he thought I may have had a strep throat, and the other one was like a cortisone shot to reduce the inflammation of my vocal cords. And he said, "Okay, now I can tell the president you're okay." Walked back down the corridor. He opened the door of the office. He says, he's fine. But there I was on probably the most powerful person in the world's plane with my ass hanging out in the infirmary. Okay.
This is the strangest Mile High club I've ever heard of.
Not a club you want to be in. That other one I want to make a bet you probably have been in, but we'll talk about that later. All right, the last quick story is the day that I knew I was getting fired, and I'll tell you that story. I was in the cabinet room, and it was Friday morning, and the president was in a little bit of a bad mood. We were flying up to Long Island to talk about the MS-13 gangs on Long Island. You know, I'm from Long Island, so I was going to take the weekend off and go back to Long Island, fly on the plane with them. And it was that morning, and the Congress had just passed a sanctions bill against the Russians for election interference. And Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, Paul Ryan are on President Trump's team. They're both Republicans. And so they passed the bill. Trump wants to veto the bill. And I'm in the cabinet room with a few of the cabinet officials. And I did something that I used to do on the campaign that I should not have done. I talked to him very straight. You know, when Trump was on the campaign, it was a lot easier to talk to him. It was more of a collaboration. When he became president, it was a little bit more brittle. He was a little bit more standoffish, and he sort of demanded your yes man status of him, if you will. And I looked at him and I said, "You got to sign that bill." And he looked at me and said, "What do you mean I have to sign that bill? I don't have to sign that bill. I'm the president of the United States." I said, "Well, let me tell you something. If you don't sign the bill, you're 6 months into the job. They're going to pick up the phone and call Schumer, and they're going to embarrass you, and they're going to get the 17 votes necessary to override your veto." He looked at me, he said, "They can't do that. I'm the president." Okay, guys, that's 8th grade social studies in the United States. And it's not even constitutional law, okay? I looked at him, I said, "Well, they can do that." He didn't believe me. He picked up the phone. He called the White House counsel. "Can they veto my bill?" And this poor son of a bitch, he was such a nervous guy. He said, "Oh, do you want me to bring the Constitution?" "No, I don't want you to bring the Constitution. Can they veto the bill or not? Can they override the veto?" And he said yes. He hung up the phone. He looked at me. He didn't say anything. 2 hours later, he signed that into legislation because he knew I was right. But then he told Jared Kushner that I had embarrassed him in the cabinet room. And Kushner said, "You know, you're probably going to lose your job." You can't tell him something. Think about how insecure he is. You can't tell him something that he doesn't know, and especially if you do it in front of other people. And he said that I embarrassed him, And then can I tell everybody how I got fired, how I knew I was fired?
Definitely.
Okay, so on Monday morning, you're issued this like White House bat phone. It's like an Apple phone, but it's got all this extra encryption on it so that no spies can attack you. This is, unfortunately, Pete Hegseth doesn't know how to use this phone, obviously. But anyway, I had the phone, and I turned the phone on to, check my emails, and there was nothing coming into the phone. And then I tried to send an email, and there was nothing going out of the phone. And then I tried to make a phone call. I said, holy shit, I'm getting fired. So they had cut my air supply at 6 a.m. So I got fired at 9:30. General Kelly fired me.
I'm going to check my emails.
Yeah. Yours is still working. You run the company. You're going to. But anyway, I got fired at 9:30. General Kelly was a total gentleman. We're very close friends. He said, listen, I got to fire you because, Trump wants you out of here. He goes, I would keep you because we're friends. I had actually traveled to Iraq and Afghanistan on troop support missions with General Kelly and Jim Mattis. So I knew those guys well. But listen, it looked like a really bad thing at the time. It's probably the best thing that ever happened to me. It's almost like the angels saved me from a worse experience with Donald Trump. But anyway, that's the story.
So, as my sidekick, Magnus, do you want to wrap it up? Is there hope for the United States of America after 1 hour of lecture?
Yeah, I asked Anthony that before we went in here. Is there any hope that this might, change and get back to normal again? And Anthony said, you said there is hope.
No question.
Yeah. But we have to stop the madness first, I guess.
Just remember, we think about things very linearly. We're biologically designed for that. We're living inside a piece of machinery that hasn't had a software upgrade in 50,000 years. The phone went from iPhone 1 to iPhone 16, but not us. We're thinking the same way we did as ancient Rome or the Vikings. We have the same mechanisms, and we think linearly, but the world happens around us exponentially. So, in the 1840s, Thomas Malthus said we're going to run out of food. Population's growing too quickly, and we're going to starve ourselves. But he left out irrigation and vertical farming and better fertilization and all the great technologies. I'm old enough to remember peak oil theory. I don't know if anybody here would remember that, but I was told in the mid-'80s we were running out of oil globally. But what do? More offshore rigs, better efficiency for our automobiles and our airplane engines and so forth. And so technology moves exponentially while we're thinking about things linearly. I think that's the same thing, and especially a place like America. I do think there's enough concerned people. Don't mistake silence for apathy. There's a lot of people that I'm talking to at very, very senior levels around the country that are looking for ways to fix this. And so I remain optimistic. But then again, I'm too short to see the glass anything other than it. looks full to me from this angle.
Magnus, Anthony, everybody, thank you so much for coming to my kitchen. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.